In today's video, I plan to give my pitch in two parts on why Tom King's stamp on the Bat universe had produced one of the most epic and unique runs we have seen with any Batman title to date. What's going on YouTube? This may be controversial, especially since it is my first video posting to this channel after a significant period, but for those who follow me on Instagram and Twitter, you know it's no surprise that I eat up nearly every title that Tom King writes. For most of you who clicked on this video, I'm sure you already know who he is, but for those who haven't read his work but listened to the negative noise that is common on Twitter, let me first tell you that he absolutely loves and understands these characters from the big two publishers ever since he interned for Chris Claremont and Marvel Comics. From my observations, it seems that readers who are highly critical of King tend to use his transition from the 7 years in the CIA CTU division to the comic industry as a way to diminish his recognized stardom. The reality is that his roots in the industry at both publishers and his CIA experience all culminated in taking the books he wrote to another level. For example, the plot he co-wrote in Grayson with Tim Seeley felt like it had a higher level of authenticity purely due to his experience. While in Omega Men, we got an intense and intellectually challenging exploration between revolution and terrorism. Even though his contributions to those titles are very much standouts, King's strength is being a Marvel writer. What I mean by this is that Marvel tends to use writers that heavily humanize superheroes rather than make them be seen as gods. And yes, I know there are many exceptions to the statement I just made, but generally, it holds true with the core superheroes in each publisher camp. Vision and Mr. Miracle are prime examples of this. In Vision, King deals with a suburban life with a sense of anxiety and a culture of what is accepted to be considered normal, while the core theme of Mr. Miracle is trauma and mental health. So if you're looking for an objective opinion here of King's Batman run, you have definitely come to the wrong video, as my bias here is quite apparent. As this channel has a prime focus on collected editions with a sprinkle of floppies here and there, I will mainly structure my case and run down the storylines in each of the 6-volume oversized hardcovers and the companions. You'll be able to find links to the collected editions in the description below. One thing you may notice is that the 6th volume is missing from the stack. At the time of releasing this video, DC is scheduling for this book to be released on July 26. Let's hope that DC doesn't cancel this, as this will complete the run of the regular series. Unlike my previous videos, I'll be diving into some heavy spoilers, so if you plan to read this run and want to go in blind, please stop this video ASAP and come back after you finish the first half of the run. That said, I'm only going to be covering the essential aspects of the run, which will leave you, the reader, with plenty of surprises. This will be a long one, so get those salty snacks ready and enjoy part 1 of this rundown of Batman by Tom King. King's run starts with a one-shot where it was co-written with Scott Snyder. The primary purpose of this issue was to pass the torch from one creative team to the next. I don't recommend skipping it, but if you intend to purely read the issues where it was 100% driven by King, it is absolutely not mandatory reading. Still, we do get a taste of what we can expect of the run from Akil Hanin's phenomenal artwork. Where King really gets started would be the I Am trilogy. The first part of the trilogy, I Am Gotham, kicks off with a series of terrorist attacks where it nearly claims Batman's life and serves as an introduction of adding 2 new characters to the Bat universe, Gotham and Gotham Girl. Immediately, this feels so organic to the story. To my knowledge, there was no DC marketing hype or the common comic speculations surrounding Gotham and Gotham Girl like what we have seen with Tinian's run with Punchline and Miracle Molly. This brother and sister duo's origin basically was them buying experimental treatment treatment that gave them Superman-like powers at the cost of drawing off their lifespan. Their motivation for this was that after Batman saved their family from a mugging, they wanted to repay Batman and the city by helping him fight the war on crime. The tension in the story goes to 11 when Hugo Strange and Psycho Pirate, yes, the very same Psycho Pirate from Crisis on Infinite Earths, completely redefines Gotham and Gotham Girl's mindset by manipulating their feelings. This all leads to an epic showdown with the Justice League. King here absolutely knows how to satisfy the reader when the question is often asked, where is the Justice League when Batman is in dire need? Throughout this run, King is paired with many A+ artists, which I'll talk about more at the end of the video, but the artist selection for the kickoff storyline with David Finch really shows how they wanted to get off the ground with guns blazing. Finch, in my opinion, is one of those artists that make my jaw drop when he brings his A-game, which he often does. My first memory of his art was in the pages of Messiah Complex, which is a standout book to this day. Moving on to the second part of the trilogy, I Am Suicide, we find out from Amanda Waller that Bane was behind all of this just to get to Psycho Pirate. This is where I was fully on board with this run, as making Bane the primary villain gave me the nostalgia factor, especially after rereading Nightfall in recent years. Coupled with fantastic art from Akhil Hanin, the whole premise of Batman utilizing his version of the Suicide Squad to perform a heist works exceptionally well, as it was a conduit to bring in Selina Kyle, who will play a major role in the rest of the run. I believe King said in an interview with Kotaku that he was a continuity nerd growing up, and when writing comics he is guilty of applying the same mindset. Batman's enthusiasm to break Bane's back here pretty much plays out like a revenge story for what happened in Nightfall, but is elevated due to the jaw-dropping art from Hanin, especially in part 4. The double-page spread action sequence that King and Hanin played out was extremely next level, even immediately following in the footsteps of the previous issues from Finch. Whenever King's run gets the thick-ass omnibus treatment, I'm already seeing future problems where the gutter loss will affect the visual experience. Hence, I'm prematurely advocating to get the oversized hardcovers while you still can, as DC is known for the massive Omni collections these days. The I Am trilogy now comes to a climactic end with I Am Bane, as Batman now needs to deal with the repercussions. King adds a lot more depth to Bane than we have previously seen from earlier writers, as he wonderfully re-explores the aspects of Batman and Bane being two sides of the same coin. Finch is again the primary artist, providing A+ visuals as the revenomized Bane pummels through Gotham, the Bat family, and even the Rogues Gallery, all to reclaim what Batman stole from him. The bloody final fight feels raw, impactful, and you could easily feel the punishment Bruce had to endure. I could only imagine King's reaction to seeing Finch's pencils for the very first time.
Dear God, it's beautiful.
Unfortunately, how it flows from I Am Gotham to I Am Suicide to I Am Bane
I'm Groot.
isn't as straightforward when reading it in the oversized hardcovers. The Rebirth oversized hardcovers blindly collect the Batman issues in order, regardless of how the story plays out. We get the first interruption of the Night of the Monster Men crossover when the first volume only features parts 1 and 4. This occurs right after I Am Gotham. There seems to be this expectation from DC that you will need to buy the oversized hardcovers of Detective and Nightwing to read all the parts, or just buy the standard hardcover. I personally didn't care too much for this crossover, as I felt I was ripped out of the tone King had set for his Gotham, and I absolutely don't consider this part of the run. The whole idea of Hugo Strange transforming corpses into giant monsters to unleash on Gotham where the Bat family needs to stop them would have served better as a standalone miniseries, but instead as a reader, we tend to have a knee-jerk reaction when we get interrupted, like when a commercial comes right on in the middle of a gripping scene.
I love refrigerators.
Now, the other break we get between I Am Suicide and I Am Bane is a beautiful interlude where we finally get to see the genuine chemistry between Bruce and Selina that has built up over the past decades. What was very fitting was pairing this two-parter with his brother Mitch Gerrard's, as his craft always conveys a lot of emotion. More importantly, his art perfectly flows from panel to panel, as it was critical to the conversation. Gerrard's is a standout here because he is not handing off his pencils to an inker or colorist, which often often alters the penciler's original vision if not paired right. Gerard's owns the process from start to finish, resulting in something spectacular. Making our way through the second volume, or issues 21 and 22 of the run, we hit another crossover, but this time the story has an essential element that plays a significant part in later issues. The Button crossover, co-written with Joshua Williamson, serves as a continuation to the DC Rebirth one-shot and Flashpoint. Going into this, Flashpoint is somewhat mandatory reading to understand Thomas Wayne and how he evolves in this run. I don't want to give too much away, but every part of this crossover is something remarkable if you're highly invested in these characters, and having Jason Fabok do the interiors is definitely a gorgeous book to look at. It's just a shame that DC didn't stick in the Flash issues here, as unlike Night of the Monster Men, it totally makes sense to include it in this volume. Fortunately, DC did put out a standalone oversized hardcover that incorporates all the issues of the Button crossover, and it even has a lenticular cover that was featured on the single issue. After the crossover, we get the one-issue team-up with Swamp Thing where Garrett comes back to deliver once again. But it's not until every epilogue is a prelude where the run comes together. This is where Bruce finally proposes to Selina and leads into the confession in what happened in the War of Jokes and Riddles. How King and Hanin utilizes the two central rogues creates an organic, intense, and an emotional mob war that drives the story forward. King's characterization of Joker and Riddler builds upon previous creative teams, and nothing feels forced from the senior editorial staff and or DC marketing. I'll elaborate more in another video on what seems like the constant interference we get from the execs and marketing. Reading between the lines from various interviews, King's run ended a bit short because DC marketing wanted to take his run in a direction that would drastically interrupt his story. I don't mean to be negative towards Tinian's writing, because I unquestionably loved his detective run and Something is Killing the Children. Those are mandatory buys, by the way. But after King finished, it feels like the creative direction Batman was going on was entirely driven by DC marketing. This was demonstrated by the newly hyped characters Punchline and Miracle Molly, as well as the Joker War story arc, which DC wanted to capitalize on the Joker film. Seeing this left a sour taste in my mouth, and it was the first time I dropped the book since pre-New 52 years. I'm sure it's an extremely well written book, but it just doesn't vibe with me. This is most likely why, despite Tinian loving the DC characters, he was compelled to sign with Substack, as that gave him complete creative control. And yes, I'll also talk about how King's Batman was also altered, specifically with a significant death in the final story arc by the big boss Dan DiDio. Moving on to the third volume. As we know, King excels in writing families, and we get him at his best due to the Bat family being at the center of the Rules of Engagement story arc, coupled with Joelle Jones' stunning art. Future me here. Sorry for the interruption, but I want to clearly state that I made these comments praising Joelle Jones's work at a time when I completely was ignorant to the fact that she has been tracing other people's art. News broke of this in early February across the various outlets when an ex-fan on Twitter noticed that Jones's work on Trial of the Amazons had identical poses used from Pepe Larraz's Polaris and Jean Grey. Despite these examples only being shared across the comic news outlets, I had a DM on Instagram from somebody who is to remain anonymous that Joelle Jones's dodgy practices goes way back when she outright stole Pat Gleason's Superman and used it in a Rules of Engagement story arc. This is such a shame, as I thought her art was always original, but God knows how many of these panels she traced over the years.
Just say it. You're a tracer.
I definitely won't be supporting her art from now on, and we will try to steer clear from any books DC gives her in the future. Now back to the video. It was a joy to see how the Robins reacted to the engagement news, and the face-off between Selina and Talia al Ghul had moments where they didn't hold back. It's also very fitting that we start to see humor being injected into the run, which continues into the Super Friends arc with Clayman doing the pencils. Having read basically the entire Superman Batman run, I'm surprised with all the history these two have. After all this time, we finally get to have King make Clark and Bruce come to terms with a close friendship. Tomasi somewhat touched upon that, but the focus was more on Damian and John. King made this possible as he edges Bruce to finally getting to a state of happiness, which really hasn't been done before without being super campy. The second half of Super Friends has Bruce and Diana spend 37 years together in another dimension, which really tests Bruce's love for Selina. We then come back to one of the main rogues, Poison Ivy, and King's decision here to push her in the direction of being a hero is long overdue. This journey becomes only realized after Ivy manages to possess everybody in the world with the exception of Bruce and Selena. Outside the main issues, we get a very disturbing one-shot story titled The Origin of Bruce Wayne, with Travis Moore doing phenomenal work here on the pencils and inks. More notably, this third volume has what could be the most important story of the run, which is Annual 2. Lee Weeks and Michael Lark, two amazing artists, take Bruce from the first date with Selena to his death, not by one of the rogues, but due to illness in his old age. It is a story told with many feels as Selena watches her husband that she loved for decades begin to waste away. The Annual also serves as a prelude to the Batman Catwoman miniseries by King and Man, as the series deals with the events following Bruce's death. This was a long one, right? I don't think I've ever covered an omnibus with this level of detail, but I still want to close out this video by giving you my final thoughts on the overall first half of the run. If it wasn't obvious enough, what makes King's run stand out and build on the shoulders of the previous creative teams is not just King himself, it's the selection of artists that he had collaborated with across each story arc. Mikel Hanin, David Finch, Mitch Gerrits, Jason Fabok, Clay Mann, Joelle Jones and Lee Weeks all blew me away from issue to issue. Not to take anything away from Greg Capullo doing every issue of the New 52 run, but it's pretty refreshing to get distinctive art styles from arc to arc. More importantly, it elevated the story to new heights. I know the reader criticism King gets is that his tone is all over the place, but this is what I immensely enjoyed about King's run. The disturbing dark elements feel much darker when contrasted against the issues where there is a significant amount of bonding and humor is what sold me. Overall, it was a highly entertaining ride with memorable moments, which I cannot say for a considerable amount of Bat books on the shelves today. Despite already formulating my opinion, I still want to hear your thoughts and how it stacks up against other creative teams. As this was a very controversial run, let's keep it friendly in the comments below. So for what's next, I'll most likely be releasing the second part of this video around the same time when Batman Catwoman wraps up and we get a collected edition, so we can discuss how the run truly ends despite DC announcing a new Bat miniseries from King called Killing Time. This miniseries already was confirmed by King himself serves as an action-focused storyline, and we won't get that emotional aspect that we got from his books for the past 5 years. If it's anything like I Am Suicide, we are in for a real treat. Despite my absence from YouTube, you all have still supported me, making my Instagram exponentially grow, and I cannot thank you all enough. In addition to the support, your DMs are always a joy to read, whether it's a reaction to the stupid memes I create or letting me know what titles I should be picking up. I absolutely love how the global comic reading community keeps getting stronger and stronger. Until the next video, grow that home library.